you can see craziness on both sides of the aisle. Now, you know, you have what's called,
This is Juan
our
Coleman.
Democrats,
He's
then
a
you
black
get to
man from Essex,
you have
Vermont,
certain
and we're
Democrats,
going to
and then
hear
you
a
get to
lot
the
from him
liberal,
today.
and then I'm in the Air National Guard, which is a component of the United States Air Force. I don't know if I'm going to finish out my career there, but I will say that I'm not here on behalf of the military. I am not representing the military in any capacity or speaking on behalf of the military. I'm here on my own free will, and I was cleared by our public affairs department to have this interview and to have a healthy dialogue with Mrs. Myra Flynn.
I met Juan my senior year of college. I'd transferred to Norwich University, a private, civilian, and military college in rural Vermont, to be closer to my family as we navigated some illness. It was fascinating. It was structured, and because of the functional job of the military, also college, the differentiating political opinions were palpable. And Juan and I were a perfect case study for these differences. We were friends who basically enjoyed arguing a lot. Weren't we kind of like frenemies? Like, what was our dynamic?
It was just, I would say, like an interesting dynamic. I believe we clicked in a lot of ways, and in some ways, when you start talking about more sensitive topics and things like that, we typically disagreed on. But that when you're in your 20s, teens and early 20s and through that stage, we're so much more mature now, so looking back, it was a necessary thing, at that time, and we're still good. Like, it's not, I don't have any issues, and I don't believe you do either. So
Juan's right. We don't have any issues. I'm not sure how, since I think it's clear we still disagree on many things, but we are able to have a healthy dialogue. So when I noticed on his social media that Juan was posting about his love for his country, gun rights, and his thoughts on policies, I reached out to him. I had to ask, what are your politics?
so for me, it's changed over the years. Growing up in North Carolina around predominantly Democrats and Southern Democrats and things of that nature. And then moving, getting sent to a military boarding high school at 15 and having a history professor who encouraged critical thinking, but he also encouraged us, don't do it with emotion, look at the facts. And so over time, I started doing that. And I'd say now most of my views and my values, they align me more, I'd say more of a conservative, now Republican conservative.
Sidebar, I'd like to note that regardless of how you're voting, or if you agree with what Juan will be sharing with us today, I want you to know that I chose to talk to Juan for a reason. Because whenever Juan and I have disagreed about anything, he's always been respectful, honest, transparent, and challenging. I'll also add, Juan has not joined a Trump cult. He's not an extremist, and he's not blindly Republican. Some of the things that people say about Trump supporters. So I think that there's a little bit of bravery here from Juan. He's opening up to me about something that makes him statistically unique. And in our community, the Black community, sometimes a little lonely.
I mean, I've been called everything from an Uncle Tom to a coon to a house nigga, all types of things. But I think it's interesting. For example, a lot of people, though, they just don't know history. So calling me an Uncle Tom is actually a compliment. It's not really I don't get offended at that. If people read the book, they'll understand that Uncle Tom was actually the one that lost his life and gave up his life to free the slaves. So I'm like, okay, cool, I'll take it. I don't really get offended at that.
Do you have other Black friends who vote the same way that you do and kind of think the same way that you do?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, most certainly. Black men too, with married families, kids, everything. Most certainly, most certainly. And it's a lot out there actually, and a lot of Black women too. But not everybody's gonna hop on a podcast and talk about it.
From Vermont Public, this is Homegoings. I'm Myra Flynn, and today is our final episode of Season 2. Just wow. We'll be popping in the feed between seasons to share some cool stuff with you here and there, but as far as our bi-monthly episodes, we'll be taking a pause. And it only seemed right to go out with this timely episode we're calling Don't Come At Me With the Race Thing, Why One Black Voter is Backing Donald Trump.
I'm Black. I love being Black, but it's not all I am. And if that's all that I have, then that's not good.
This is Homegoings. We're a proud member of the NPR network. Welcome home. Here's the deal. Juan Coleman, who we will hear from again a little later, is not alone in his support of Trump.
People expect that if you're Black, you have to be Democrat. They try to scare me to not wear this hat. My own friends, but this hat, it gives me power in a way. There was something about when I put this hat on, it made me feel like Superman.
But I'm here tonight to tell you, no matter your political background, that the best chance we have to give our babies a better life is to elect Donald Trump President of the United States.
I did learn from that situation, people in our position ain't supposed to speak on their political candidates. That's what I learned. And I also learned everybody voting for Trump. You know what I'm saying?
Black men, I love black men. I love them. I love them. I have gone through the roof with black men.
That was rapper Kanye West, entertainer Amber Rose, rapper Benny the Butcher, and of course, Donald Trump himself. And though through the roof is a reach, what Trump says here about his recent support from Black people isn't wrong. Though we won't know the actual numbers until the election, according to Pew Research, 7% of Black voters over 50 currently identify or lean Republican. For Black voters under 50, that number jumps to 17%. In particular, Trump is polling well with Black men. Poll after poll have shown support ranging from 20% to almost 40%. This uptick isn't huge, mind you, but still, it's piqued my curiosity around the level of support for a man who has said some pretty shocking things about marginalized people in particular.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country, and it's a shame.
So, with November 5th right around the corner, I've got some questions, and I knew just who to put them to. How did being Black become synonymous with being a Democrat?
Well, Black folks in this country have been Democrats for several decades historically. I think the big changeover, the abrupt exit from the GOP happened in the 1960s, the Goldwater era, and you haven't seen Black Americans move back to the Republican Party in a substantial way ever since.
This is Eva McKend.
I'm a national politics correspondent at CNN.
Eva spends a lot of time on the road, traveling from state to state, city to city, campaign rally to campaign rally, not only to get a lay of the land here in America, but to talk with the true quilters behind our patchwork political landscape, Americans themselves.
So I'm spending a lot of time in the battleground states, the 7 states ultimately that are going to decide the election because of our system of the Electoral College in this country, where even if the candidate gets the most votes, that doesn't necessarily mean that they win. And so that's where I am most. There's a large concentration of Black voters in battleground states like Georgia and in North Carolina.
Black voters. You probably know this, that Black people are assumed to be Democrats in America. It's almost inherent. My mom actually used to tell me when it came to dating, I don't care who you bring home as long as they're a Democrat. So why is this? Well, you can thank a man named Barry Goldwater. Let's throw it back. Here's the tea. Black people, 100 years ago, if you brushed up against another brother or sister on the street and asked them about their politics, most of them would have been Republican. Yep, Republican. And it makes sense because the Republican Party was Lincoln's party, who spearheaded one of the hugest political shifts in the history of Black civil rights, our emancipation from slavery. Also, the Republican Party not only pushed for the right to vote for Black people, but pushed for Black politicians during that postbellum period known as Reconstruction. But 60 years ago, just before the GOP met for its national convention in San Francisco, 3 civil rights activists, Andrew Goodman, who was Jewish American and white, James Chaney, a Black man from the South, and Michael Schwerner, a white New Yorker, set out on a quest to help Black voters vote. But they never came back. They were kidnapped on a dark back road in Neshoba County, Mississippi. And in early August, their bodies were found buried inside the works of a dam. When I read about this moment, 60 years ago, it reminds me a little of our own recent racially charged historic moment, the very public murder of George Floyd in 2020. Because the deaths of these 3 young men rocked the nation, creating their own 1964 version of a very public reckoning. Because just 2 weeks after the men's disappearance, and mere days before the GOP convention opened, then President Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act into law, making discrimination in public venues illegal. So, it's 1964, the election is right around the corner, and inside the Republican Party, there's 2 candidates vying for the nomination. New York governor and liberal frontrunner Nelson Rockefeller, and this right-wing guy who came to the political party bearing the name Mr. Conservative. This was Barry Goldwater. Goldwater believed the Civil Rights Act was unconstitutional, and that states should implement the law in their own time, individually. Many white Southerners, especially segregationists, felt reassured by Goldwater's words, but Black Americans felt betrayed, a feeling that was only encouraged by Goldwater's acceptance speech, where he famously said,
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
Basically, there are no handouts here in America. Each state is responsible for their own war on poverty, and that civil rights was no reason to interfere with the rights of individual states. Needless to say, the Black Republican voters remaining exited the party swiftly.
You cannot deny the decades of history here as to why we got to this big lopsided nature, right, of more than 80% of Black folks this cycle going to vote for Democrats. You can't ignore that history. There is a reason, there is a historical basis for why so many Black folks support Democrats. You know, and the movement happened in the 60s because of racism.
Racism. This is a word that's been on my radar for a while now, watching Trump's political ascent. Because here's the deal. Even a whiff of racism tends to make this Black woman squirm. And I know brown and Black folks who have been squirming since 2016 because...
Well, because of the comments that he has made, right? He told members of Congress of color when he was president that they should go back to where they came from.
As far as I'm concerned, if you hate our country, if you're not happy here, you can leave. And that's what I say all the time. That's what I said in a tweet, which I guess some people think is controversial. A lot of people love it, by the way. A lot of people love it. But if you're not happy in the U.S., if you're complaining all the time, very simply, you can leave. You can leave right now.
Some of the demagoguery that we have seen around Haitian immigrants more recently.
We will begin the largest deportation operation in the history of the United States. Dwight Eisenhower right now has that record.
His previous comments about the Central Park Five, now the exonerated Five.
When a lot of people, including Mayor Bloomberg, agreed with me on the Central Park Five, they admitted, they said, they pled guilty. And I said, well, if they pled guilty, they badly hurt a person, killed a person ultimately. And if they pled guilty, then they pled, we're not guilty.
This is all a well-documented history. And you hear from voters that they maybe can't even entertain some of the policy positions because there is this wall up because of all of these other things that he is associated with historically. That being said, I was in Philadelphia during the debate between Vice President Harris and the former president. I spoke to many Black men in all corners of the city, and some of them showed a real interest there. They specifically did not like this framing that we're hearing Democrats employ, the felon versus the prosecutor. And you have to, keep in mind, we are disproportionately more likely to come in contact with law enforcement and all that comes with. And so there is, I think, a real possibility, vulnerability in terms of using that as an argument because it's isolating for some folks. I was speaking to a man in Florida. He runs a Facebook group called Felons for Trump. One of the words that he used that stuck out to me is he described immigrants as invaders. And it was just so searing, right, to hear a Black man use that language. But that's the language that the former president uses. And clearly he sees a kinship there where he sees immigration and migrants as a threat to him. But there isn't an argument being made that Black Americans are not getting specific benefits or programs or anything that, we are entitled to in this country as a result of migrants getting emergency temporary services. Yet and still, this argument is so potent. And I think that is why you see some of these Black male voters in particular gravitating towards this, even though, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. There are a segment of Black American voters who vote for Democrats cycle after cycle, who feel as though their vote is not getting them very far. And so Democrats have to continue to work for that. We often talk about persuasion voters or persuadable voters. Well, Black folks are persuadable voters, right? They still need to be courted and spoken to and really made to understand how the policies impact their life. So in this election, at least from the conversation I have with these voters who have a curiosity, especially on economic issues with what conservatives are offering, they want Democrats to earn their vote.
We should not take the Black Democratic vote for granted, basically.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
When we come back, we'll hear more from Juan Coleman and dive deeper into his reasons for backing Trump come this election.
Yeah, so I voted for him the first time around. I would adamantly vote for him again.
That's right after this. Tell me about Trump.
During 2016, it was very interesting because at first I was like, why is he running? And then I listened to him speak one time and I was like, you know what? I said, okay.
This is Juan Coleman again. We're talking over Zoom. And I'll be transparent in saying we talked for like 3 hours. He has a lot to say about Donald Trump and politics in general.
Like, I had never heard a political candidate say pretty much what I believe everybody else is thinking and not really care what the actual reaction's going to be. And for me, I saw like a level of like genuineness in that. And I'm like, wow, okay, because it actually, I'm not saying him and I are alike, but I'm similar in that way. I'm going to speak my mind. And if you like it, you like it. If you don't, you don't. I listened to him and then I said, okay, now let me look more at the policies here and what he's actually saying and talking about. And if this is what this guy says he's going to do, if this is what he's looking at, I'm like, he's definitely going to get my vote and my support.
When you talk about some of the policies that you ended up respecting, what are some of those policies?
Look at the First Step Act, for example. This was an act that was passed during the Trump administration in order to make it so that people that had a lot of like your nonviolent drug offenses, their sentences were reduced. I mean, when you got, some women and men too in jail for 20, 30 years for weed, it's like, come on now. And it was very interesting because that act passed and it actually helped, I believe, about 90%. I'm throwing some numbers out there, but about 90% of Black people that act affected, they got their sentences reduced and were released. And then not only that, one of the beautiful things about it was then you have the Ready to Work initiative, which, okay, so now that you're out of prison, you've been in prison for a while, you join this Ready to Work initiative. We have resources and people here who are going to take the time to help you get inundated back into society so that you don't do anything silly and go back the way you came from.
It's probably worth noting that the First Step Act retroactively applied an Obama-era change to the sentencing disparity between crack cocaine and regular cocaine. But the goal of the First Step Act was to cut unnecessarily long federal sentences and improve conditions in federal prisons. One of the ways this was accomplished was by allowing judges to sentence people for shorter than the statutory minimum. Also, Trump has mostly backed away from this era of his presidency. I should be clear, this was a good law, and it has reduced sentences for nonviolent offenders and reintegrated previously incarcerated peoples into the work world, but I'm not sure if it's to the extent one hopes. Research on re-unemployment of felons is complicated, since a lot of it focuses on white-collar criminals.
Then I look at the unemployment rate. The unemployment rate for Blacks during Trump's first 4 years hit a record low. I believe it's like 5.2% or something like that. A record low, which is very, very good. So that was another thing, not just saying, hey, we're going to get Black people jobs, but okay, how are we going to do it? So that was great. I believe the Black labor force, so it rose up under Trump too. So I said, okay. So not only now do you have policies that he said he was going to do it, I'm like, okay, this guy's actually getting this done.
To Juan's point about the labor force participation rate, we should note that this rate fluctuates a lot, which makes its peaks kind of unimpressive. Economists measure the trend rather than an individual data point. The labor force participation rate for Black people in America peaked at 63.2% in December 2019 under Trump, and peaked at 64% in 2023 under Biden. Also, our unemployment rates have hit a new record low under Biden. Overall, unemployment was definitely better in the Trump years than the Obama ones, and still below those of 2008. Back to the relatability between Trump and Black people. Interestingly enough, for all this talk about the early release of incarcerated people, it's Trump's trouble with the law that has been cited as making him akin to Black folks and the Black experience. Back in February, there was a gala for people like Juan called the Black Federation of Conservatives Gala. Trump won an award and gave a speech where he said,
and a lot of people said that's why the Black people like me, because they have been hurt so badly and discriminated against. And they actually viewed me as I'm being discriminated against. It's been pretty amazing.
I wonder, when you hear things like that, does it square with like the pro-Black policymaker that you also, hold him to? Or is it something that you just don't feel the need to square?
I don't disagree with him with that statement. I literally said to friends of mine, I'm like, damn, it's like they treating him like a black man. So I think that's not the only reason why people are drawn to him. But if people can see this and they're like, hold up a second, like, whoa, like you can just drag me through the mud like legally like this.
I think so far, my interactions with Juan Coleman, Black, Donald Trump supporter, feel about as usual as any interaction I've had with any Trump supporters. Even if Trump has said some pretty rough stuff, nothing seems to throw Juan off of his support or change his mind about who he'll be voting for. In fact, he's frustrated with the Democratic Party. It's the pandering by Democrats to Black people for their vote that really grinds Juan's gears.
I actually think it's interesting that people are expecting Black people to vote a certain way. I would consider that to quite possibly be a form of racism. So you can throw some faces out there. You can put an entertainer on stage twerking and not talk about the issues, and that's going to be attractive to me. No, actually, I find it to be insulting. As a Black person, don't come at me with the race thing. We need to talk about issues, so.
Juan talks a lot about how we should do this, not lean on race in our politics, stick to the issues. But there have been times under the Trump administration where race has been the issue. Take, for instance, Trump's support from David Duke, the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan. When Trump learned about his endorsement, he was not quick to disavow the KKK or David Duke. Here's an exchange with CNN's Jake Tapper in 2016.
Well, I have to look at the group. I mean, I don't know what group you're talking about. You wouldn't want me to condemn a group that I know nothing about. I have to look. If you would send me a list of the groups, I will do research on them, and certainly I would disavow if I thought there was something wrong. But you may have groups in there that are totally fine, and it would be very unfair. So give me a list of the groups, and I'll let you know.
Okay. I mean, I'm just talking about David Duke and the Ku Klux Klan here, but...
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know David Duke. I don't believe I've ever met him. I'm pretty sure I didn't meet him, and I just don't know anything about him.
These examples, I have to say, are really, really tough to get past for me as a Black person. But as we deduced at the start of this episode, voting is not a monolith, and neither are Black people.
It's interesting again because you know who Senator Robert Byrd was?
Nope.
Bobby Byrd. He was a longstanding senator in our U.S. government. He was a former Klansman. And Barack Obama got up there and eulogized him at his funeral and said all these nice things about him. Nobody batted an eye.
Okay, a quick note for two fun facts. One, Robert Byrd was a Klansman. That's correct. He also expressed deep regret for his past and became increasingly liberal over time. By the time of his death, he was pretty damn left-wing. And I'm not making this point to absolve him of his past, but to say that because of his transparency and repentance around his history with the KKK, he's historically received a pass by the Democratic Party writ large. Also, to keep it fair, Donald Trump was against David Duke back in 2000, just as he was in 2016. And it's at this point, in listening to Juan, that I'm starting to tap into something even more nuanced in this conversation. And that would be this whiff of false equivalency. It's hard to ignore because he does this a lot. He compares the things Trump says or does to another Black person or even the Black community as a whole who has done or said something he believes to be similar or just as bad.
He was a former Klansman. And Barack Obama eulogized him when he passed away. He spoke at his funeral and eulogized him.
Juan doesn't just support Trump despite the larger feelings of racism, felt writ large by his community of Black people. He almost supports Trump in spite of Black people.
I mean, just look at the black jobs thing, for example. That's really what people are nitpicking. He said black jobs. I'm like, Black people put Black in front of everything. And now all of a sudden you got a problem because somebody said black jobs. We say Black community. We say Black love. We say Black unemployment. We say Black education, Black businesses. Now, all of a sudden, because of who said it, now people want to nitpick that somebody said black jobs and act like we don't know what he meant. I mean, come on.
I'm also noticing that a lot of the things Juan loves about Trump is that Trump embodies the complete opposite of a Black person and our issues within our culture. It's as if Trump's very existence points out the deficits in ours. It's a strange route to take, but I think that somehow, through his support of Trump and the bucking of the Democratic Party, Juan is working to encourage us to think for ourselves, make up our minds about politics, be a little more confident and wise in our culture and who we choose to lead us, not be sheep, not be Democrats because our parents told us to, not hate Donald Trump because everyone else does, not be victims to the propaganda of the media or what he calls identity politics, to not be victims at all. Do you ever feel, or have you ever considered that being a conservative person in your politics, in your way of life, might be a self-defense mechanism, like a way of like getting ahead of the hurt and saying, you know, I can participate in just as much of the white world as the rest of white people?
No, I don't view it in that way. I view it more from making sure that I don't have a victim mentality and a victim mindset. And there's a very insulting quote out there that really, really stuck with me. And I heard it when I was younger. It said, if you want to hide something from a Black person, you put it in a book. And that right there, I said, aha. But it all goes back to the plantation when they didn't want Blacks learning how to read and write. And there was a reason for that, right? But now what's the excuse? Pick up a book and actually read and educate yourself. Mari, but I'm not under the delusion that we're going to end racism. It ain't happening. This is it's evil everywhere. We're not going to end racism. And have I experienced it? You damn right I have. But the thing about it is like, how do we overcome that? So I don't, it's not a defense mechanism, but I'll tell you this right now on this call. I don't feel inferior to any white person. I've had white people call me a nigger before. Okay, that's cool. If that's what helps you sleep at night, that's the issue that they have. Did it make me feel good? No, but at the same time, it gets to a point like, that's not what you are. So at what point am I going to, they called me that expecting a certain reaction. And then they want me to get out of, to act a certain way and to act a fool out here. And I'm like, you know what? Nah, because I know who I am. I don't feel inferior to any white person. And there's nobody out here that's going to make me feel that way. It's just, I refuse. I refuse to accept that. I don't care about that stuff and that victim mentality. All of these people that we sit here and celebrate during Black History Month, they went through something. I never once heard my grandfather and his friends and these people blame anything on the white person. And they had it a hell of a lot harder than we do. I never heard them complain at all about any of that.
Do you love Black people? Do you love Black culture? Because I think I am hearing kind of this repetition of a story of like Black people making up excuses, Black people calling each other out as not being Black enough. I'm hearing so much of your purview on Black culture as actually pretty negative. And so I'm curious, like, knowing that so much of these victim mentalities, as you call them, come from being actual victims historically, is there compassion for that? Is there empathy for that?
I do love Black people, which is why I speak those truths and I say those things, and I don't go along to get along. Because in order for people to truly be free these days, why not be free here? I pray for a day where we continue to get so strong mentally that regardless of what side is telling us stuff, we question it and we do our own research and we really dig and we're willing to unlearn a lot of things that maybe we thought were true, because that's a painful process sometimes when you've been taught something and you think is true. But the Bible does say, not to preach up here, it says the truth shall set you free. And that's a bold statement, so I love my people. I love our people, but I love all people as well, to include the ones that disagree with me on things. But I am critical towards the Black race because I believe if we don't wake up And this being woke stuff, that's a cute catchphrase, but we need to be awake. We don't need to be woke. We need to be awake.
I love Black people enough to want them off of the Democratic plantation. It's time. It's been time.
Juan Coleman, thank you for sharing your story with me today. Politics, like religion, like class, like race, are what many consider to be a pretty private matter. So I'm honored. And some of you may be asking, why? Myra, would you share the politics of one person who represents one party on this show at all? And I think I'd like to answer you with the end to this episode. It's not our usual ending, the way we end with art. But I think we can all value the art of listening. And yes, Juan is just one voice, but truly isn't all of politics, policy, change in general just the collection of one voice at a time? And maybe you disagree. Maybe you disagree with everything Juan has said, and I've said, or the media says, or maybe Kamala or Trump or Biden has said. That's fair. So I'll leave you with Eva McKend from CNN, who reminds us, go ahead and do something about it. Do something about it. Do something about it. Do something about it. Do something about it.
Well, I can say for me personally, I can't imagine not voting. I really can't, given our legacy in this country, all of our ancestors who fought, who died, who were dehumanized, belittled, made to do poll tests and all kinds of horrors just to get the right. I just can't imagine not participating in this process. And that doesn't necessarily mean voting for either of the major parties, right? You know, writing in your mom is still a vote, right? You're still participating in the process. But yes, I just can't imagine, given our legacy and our history in this country. But it's not only important for Black folks to vote, it's important for everyone to vote. We live in a democratic society and we can't take it for granted. It's really, really a blessing. Not everyone even has the option to vote in a democracy. So it's something that I certainly cherish, and I hope that others do too.
Well, folks, that's a wrap on Season 2 of Homegoings. Together, we've explored so many nuanced topics around race and identity and talked with so many cool people, from aging to live performances, hip-hop stars to thoughts on freedom, the music industry to the biracial conundrum. We have been digging in on the brown and Black experience. And you, our homies, have been along for the entire ride. I'll say it for the 15th time this season. Thank you so much for listening to the show. It has been a pleasure being here with you. This episode was reported and mixed and fact-checked by me, with support from our associate producer James Stewart and Corey Doxer. The episode was edited by Brittany Patterson with help from Jane Lindholm and Elodie Reed. I composed the theme music, and all other music is from Blue Dot Sessions. Elodie Reed is the graphic artist behind this episode's Homegoings portrait, which features Juan looking very patriotic. Check it out, as well as the rest of our dope artwork, on homegoings.co. While you're there, you can subscribe to our newsletter and watch some of the live interviews we've taped. Also, give us a follow on Instagram at We Are Homegoings. And though we will be taking a seasonal pause, keep an eye on your feed, because remember those shorties we asked you for? Those little lighthearted questions seeking advice from us about braids or boyfriends or baking? Well, we got some good ones, so we'll be dropping little 15-minute answers to some of those questions here, whenever the mood strikes. Also, it's not too late to send us more shorties. If you have a lighthearted advice-based question around identity and race, send it our way. You can write to me at hey@homegoings.co. See you soon, homies. And thanks again for another righteous season. As always, you are welcome here.